I often get asked how important it is, that you remember specific numbers in job interviews and whether you're going to get disqualified if you cannot remember specific details. And truth be said, it very much depends on where are you in the interviewing process in the first place. For example, for a phone interview, if you cannot remember numbers, if you cannot remember details, like really deep details of projects that happened, a while back, my experience has shown that it's not by far a disqualifier. Even further, that's probably the number one feedback I hear from people that were successful in their phone interviews. So say for phone interviews, it doesn't really matter that you remember all the possible details. You'd rather focus on having your crisp and concise stories, and basically that's what really matters. Now, when it comes to the on-site interviews, and often candidates get this type of feedback for the on-site interview: be prepared, with numbers, be prepared with details. Now, here it gets a little bit more interesting, because for the on-site, it's intentionally supposed to be a more intensive experience, because these are the types of experiences that are the most revealing of one's personality on assessing someone's fit for a given role. I'm not talking the cultural fit, but rather the behavioral fit for that specific role. So there are a couple of scenarios here where remembering details is important to understand. One reason why that might not be quite obvious why they ask you for so many numbers is because they want to see on whether you try to make up a story or not. Oftentimes, when you try to ask someone about numbers, if that person is very good at biasing stories to their, and essentially lying in job interviews because they know very well how to speak, as soon as you ask them a couple of numbers, the probability that they will do well also with numbers significantly decreases. And that's how you would spot, someone who's not genuine in a job interview. The other reason why someone would ask you for so many numbers, and it would be a significant parameter in the overall performance, would be that these companies expect you to spend time preparing, especially for an on-site interview. Right? You could say, okay, you cut a few corners for the phone interview, but for the on-site interview, that's a different experience, and again, they do expect you to prepare. So if you don't have those numbers, chances are you will not sound as convincing as it would have been expected for you to be. So if in a phone interview that wouldn't be disqualified because that's not what they're assessing for necessarily, in an on-site interview, yes, that could be something that will negatively impact your performance. The other problem that you have here in behavioral interviewing is that, truth be said, not many people use enough quantifiers in their examples. And of course, I'm not only talking about here quantifying the results. That's probably a reflex for most people. But giving your example a bit of context in time, giving your project a bit of context in terms of size, or these types of details that would paint essentially a picture in your interviewer's mind to properly understand what actually went on in that story. So these numbers and these quantifiers can actually very much play to your favor in an interviewing process. And yes, they do actually make all the difference in the right type of scenarios. And last but not least, it could also be an interviewing technique that the interviewer wants to get you stuck on something. So they could ask you, how much the company had in gross revenue for the last quarter, right? And not many people know these things, and you're not supposed to prepare this for an on-site interview, probably except if you're working in finance or that type of role. So they would ask you this, you would get stuck, and if you get stuck on this one and you do not get unstuck for the subsequent ones, then basically that's where the problem comes in. And I did hear of multiple reports of people who were convinced they were going to fail the interview because they didn't know these numbers. They couldn't remember specific numbers about the company's balance sheet, and they actually did get the job, right? So the trick here would be that if they try to corner you with some numbers that are basically overkill for the job prep, you should also realize that maybe you cannot know it all, and sometimes you also have to move on and try to perform for the rest of the interview. So this would be some of the scenarios and how important it is to know this amount of detail for a job interview. So not so much for a telephone interview, and I would say very much so knowing the relevant quantifiers for an on-site interview.